You believe what you have been seeing on CNN today, ladies and gentlemen? Can you believe it? Supposedly, a CNN reporter found Osama bin Laden, took a television camera crew with him, went into Osama bin Laden's hideout, interviewed him and his top leadership, his top lieutenants and colonels and generals in their hideout. This is a CNN reporter with a camera crew. And he came out and told everybody, within 3 weeks, Osama bin Laden is going to attack the United States and Israel. Now, don't you think that's kind of strange, folks? You see, because the largest intelligence apparatus in the world, with the biggest budget in the history of the world, has been looking for Osama bin Laden for years and years and years, and can't find him. A reporter from CNN and his little camera crew got in to Osama bin Laden's secret hideout and conducted an interview. If you don't believe me, tune into CNN. They're probably running it right now as I'm speaking. And if you believe it, you are one of the stupidest jerks that ever lived on the face of this earth. And whatever is going to happen that they're going to blame on Osama bin Laden, don't you even believe it. When in hell are all you people going to wake up?
So let's just start to propose some answers that might better meet the evidence. So on the tenants article, I saw a couple of things. I started with the impact zones of the towers because I thought that was interesting that a company called Marsh & McLennan occupied all of the floors in the North Tower where the plane impacted and the fires kind of raged there. Marsh & McLennan was this big insurance broker, financial company. And those floors that Marsh occupied were the exact floors that had been updated for fireproofing in the few years before 2011. So 110 stories, and there was only 8 of them that got full floor fireproofing upgrades, and all 8 of them were Marsh & McLennan, floors 93 to 101, where the plane impacted. So I thought that was pretty odd. Started looking at Marsh. I thought, yeah, that seemed odd to me. And started looking at Marsh and some of the people that worked for them, and I noticed there were a couple of Bush family members, like Craig Stapleton, who is the husband of George W. Bush's cousin, and he was there, and he used to be Bush's partner in the Texas Rangers deal that made him so much money. I also noticed L. Paul Bremer. This guy stood out just glaringly. L. Paul Bremer was the 2 years later the Iraq occupation governor, so people may remember him better for that. But on 9/11, he was the CEO of Marsh Crisis, a division of Marsh & McLennan, and he had an office in the South Tower. So when I started looking at these floors in the different areas of the towers, I noticed that these matched up, and Marsh had not only the entire impact zone of the North Tower, but they had a subsidiary right in the middle of the South Tower, and L. Paul Bremer had an office there. And Bremer was one of the first people to start giving us the official story for what happened. He somehow survived the day. I don't know how. He had his office there, but instead of going to his office, he had showed up on all the news stations telling us Osama bin Laden was responsible, and probably Iraq and Iran also, and that we really ought to start a massive war against those people. So that's interesting. The other thing that was interesting about Bremer was he was a director for a Japanese company called Komatsu that had just patented a thermite demolition device in 1996. I thought it was interesting enough that maybe it should be investigated. Over in the South Tower impact zone, there's a couple of companies that occupied that. One of them was called Aon, and again, Bush's first cousin Jim Pierce worked right there in the South Tower impact zone. He had a meeting scheduled for that day. That he moved across the street to the Millennium Hotel, and so he survived the day miraculously. There's also Baseline Financial right there in the impact zone. This guy named Joseph Kasputis was really interesting to me because he was very closely related to the Department of Energy, and also just above him was a company called the Washington Group, and they were also very closely related to the Department of Energy and had just purchased a company called Morrison Knudsen that did hundreds of demolition projects for the Army Corps of Engineers. It seems worth investigating, Todd. I think that's the main thing. I mean, if we have to, we'll go forward and we'll do all the footwork and we'll, make it as painfully obvious as possible that there are a lot of people like these people I'm naming who are at least as suspicious as the 19 hijackers that were named, at least, if not far more so. And they did benefit, and they did have access to the technology, and they did have access to the buildings, which, when you know explosives were placed in the buildings, those are the questions you want answered.
My name's Tom Sullivan. I worked for Controlled Demolition Incorporated, CDI, the top-rated explosives demolition firm in the world, owned by the Loiseau family during the years surrounding 9/11. And I worked for them as an explosives loader for 2.5 years. As an explosives loader, my job was to place explosives in the buildings to prepare them for demolition. There are many steps that you need to take. First off is you have to weaken the building. To weaken the building, that means the staircase, all the staircases have to be cut at intervals. The firewalls have to be removed. The elevator shafts have to be cut.
I look down to my right, and the elevators exploded, something out of like a Bruce Willis Die Hard movie. People just come running out of the elevators on fire, fireballed. I mean, it was like, what is going on here? Something's up here. I mean, the plane's up there, now there's fire down here.
Then you have to move to the support columns on the particular load floors. And those are cut by a torch for two reasons. First, to weaken them, and also to allow for charges to be placed onto the structure, onto the columns themselves. And that essentially reduces their strength by about 20%. And even with all of that work being done to weaken this building, it still remains safely standing, so we can continue to work in it. The story that just a few columns can cause a synchronized global collapse, an implosion, is, well, that's just nonsense. I don't see how this could actually happen in real life. When we load a building, we have to have all the support columns on a given load floor fail at the same time, within milliseconds of one another. And therefore, the entire building comes down in a synchronized implosion. So I think this notion of a one column failure causing an entire building to implode in a synchronized fashion is just nonsense.
The fact that they came down at virtually free fall speed, that there was molten metal under the buildings. Molten metal needs temperatures far exceeding what fire can reach. Furthermore, the buildings came straight down. That's the whole purpose of controlled demolition of the type that we call implosion. There are only a few companies in the world qualified to do it. So the idea that somehow a plane hitting a building plus a fire would cause that building to come straight down. We're talking about over 300 steel columns, 47 core columns, over 200 columns around the perimeter, for the building to come down in a symmetrical way. So the building comes down as you see in the videos. All of those steel columns had to collapse simultaneously. For that to have occurred because of random fires throughout the buildings would be an absolute miracle.
Looking at the building, it wouldn't be a problem once you gained access to the elevator shafts.
How about an elevator modernization, which we know was going on the 9 months prior to 9/11? Yes, Elevator World, March 2001 documents it. In fact, they were in the middle of this modernization. There are people who noted that the elevators were locked in turn and that there were guards placed at these locked elevators during the modernization. Of course, you would have to have access to security. Securicom was brought in. Who sits on the board of Securicom? Marvin Bush, the younger brother of George Bush.
Then a team of loading experts would have access to all the core columns and beams. The rest could be accomplished at that point by just the right kind of explosives for the job at hand. The choices are many out there. You wouldn't need miles and miles of det cord. You could have used wireless remote detonators, and they have been available for years. You need to only look at an action movie to see them in use, and of course the military has them as well. Contractors don't use them, on the other hand, because they're just too expensive. Well, you wouldn't have found steel casings to be left in the rubble. They haven't been used for years. What we use now is RDX copper-jacketed shape charges, and when they're initiated, there's nothing left of those charges. And in the case of thermite, well, thermite self-consuming cutting charges have been around since they first patented in 1984. So there would be nothing left in the debris pile except some residue of molten iron.
Get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails, like you're in a foundry.
These incredibly hot areas were found at the bottoms of the elevator shafts, down 7 basement levels. The molten steel was found 3, 4, and 5 weeks later when the rubble was being removed. He said that molten steel was also found at World Trade Center 7. The highest temperature was in the east corner of the South Tower, where a temperature of 1,377 degrees Fahrenheit was recorded. The molten steel in the basement was more than double that temperature,